Howdy folks, it's Eston Walden with another audiobook review. Today we're doing the Sixth Realm Part 1. I'm sure it'll be shortly followed by Sixth Realm Part 2. It's by Michael Chatfield and narrated by Neil Helleger. So we're into book 6 in this series, and it's kind of what you expect, right? So a lot of the things are starting to solidify in a particular way that the book is structured. So on the uniqueness scale, it's the same thing as it was last time, 4.5. The fact that each of the individual parts of this book are not necessarily unique, but when you combine them all together, it makes a unique take on literature RPG. Just not using every single individual things by themselves, but taking combat styles, taking military tactics, taking town building, taking crafting, and putting it all into one book is what gives this particular series more uniqueness from my perspective. In this particular book, we see some interesting dungeon mechanics in the sense that the way that the world is structured, I'm trying to think about how to say this in such a way that it is. The questing system, which is not very commonly brought up, usually whenever someone has a big achievement and whatnot, the system comes in and lets them know some notification or something, but rarely do people get quests, and that shows up in this book in the sense that the characters get some quests from the system, and it enlightens you a little bit more about what's going on there. When we go into the character development section, we have two main characters, and both of them grew a lot. Ariix had, from my perspective, the most leaps and bounds, and a lot of it was from his perspective. Even though Rugrat was, right next to him, Ariix had some big growths in his trade skills. He had big growths in power, and we had a chance to see what happens when Ariix lets loose, what type of capabilities he has, and it was very impressive. It was one of those wow moments where you're like, you're surprised at how much he's been holding back. He's been doing a lot of training with actual people and not something he can just let loose on. And when he gets the chance, it is very impressive. And so the character development's a 5 out of 5. Being able to balance all of these different things, trade, power, town building, all of these things being developed at the same time, the book could become tedious and boring, but it doesn't feel that way. Into the magic system, in the last couple of hours of this book, there are some things about how the questing system is utilized that opens up the world some as to how it works and why it's working. It's kind of just a sneak peek into what's going on, and there's still a lot to be determined, which we have, several more realms to go, and this book is even broken up into 2 parts, so we might see that in the future as well. But on the in terms of the magic system, we're doing good. Let's see here if there's anything else I missed. Secondary characters take a big role in this book, just like they do in the previous books. One thing I liked about this is that they were a lot more side plot than they were main storyline. So in the previous book, the main characters grew, they got stronger, they learned new spells, whatever. But it didn't feel like they were as much of the main character, even though you did hear a lot of their perspective. A lot of what their goals and things they were trying to achieve was to make the world around them stronger. They were trying to make their towns bigger and better. And this book that didn't seem to be the case. It felt like the main characters were the goal. There was a section at the very beginning that was just a show of how strong and powerful the people are. It tossed in some fun combat scenes that you got to be engaged with, and so that was pretty great. But the goal was the main characters. That being said, when we heard about the side characters, they were getting stuff done. They were conquering a floor. They were, fighting in an arena. They all had their own, just like every other time we've seen them, they all have their own motivations. We saw a character, that essentially did to his subordinates what Ariix and Rugrat did to him, in the sense of like, okay, well, now it's your turn. You got to take care of business. If I'm sitting here holding your hand, you won't grow. And seeing that pass from generation to generation is a good sign that like the world is growing, right? We're not just, passing on power to someone and then they hold it forever, because that's not realistic. And so being able to see that was pretty great. And now we get to like the bad news. Okay, so uniqueness was 4.5. Character development was 5, secondary characters 5, magic system is 5. All of that is great. The book itself was fantastic, but now we move into the narration. And so I rated the previous book with 4s for the narration, and I think that may have been a mistake. In regard to like dynamic voicing, I think it was probably closer to a 5. Vocal cast, maybe a 4.5. But they changed narrators on us, guys. And so I thought about just saying this at the beginning. If there was one thing I had to put at the top of the list of things that I hate in audiobooks, is when you change the narrator. A narrator has to be either dying or doing such a horrible job that it detracts from the book. And that was definitely not the case. Anybody who gets a 4 or above for me is doing just fine. I thought about grading lower just because they changed narrators on me, but I had some grace. But he did get 3s. And so when it came to dynamic voicing, and it's hard not to compare it against previous audiobooks, especially if you're in a series. In dynamic voicing, he was much more muted. He didn't get as excited when the main characters got excited. Their arguments were muted. He was able to get quiet sometimes whenever, something, interesting or scary was about to come about. So it wasn't like he was monotone the entire time, but like there was it was a stark difference that showed how good potentially the previous narrator was. And so 3 for dynamic voicing, a 3 for vocal cast, because it was like the previous narrator but worse in the sense that like obviously you've gotten used to like hearing people being portrayed a certain way in their voicing, and now everyone sounds different. And with a cast this size, all of the secondary characters sound alike. That's probably an exaggeration. I can distinguish the main characters' voices, although it was sad to hear Rugrat's voice be so significantly different than it was previously. But I could distinguish some of the main characters, and so I gave him a 3. Even though, due to the confusion of changing narration, that was probably multiplied in difficulty. Characters you hear that you think you should know who they are, you don't, and so there's just a lot of confusion on that. Either way, 3 out of 3 for dynamic voicing and vocal cast. So let's see here. The book itself was a 4.86, narration was a 3, overall was 4.25. The book itself was good, worth listening to, just don't be surprised that the narrator changed. That's all there is to it. You know everything else about the book. There's a lot of combat, but it's not like a sexual book, and so the age rating is easily, teenager, even potentially mid-teenagers and above. They talk about a lot of serious things though, like war, how to, punish people who do wrong, and so there could be conversations you need to have with your kids whenever you're reading through it. There's almost no romance in this book. There is some violence, some gore, but not really a whole lot. It's very humorous. The two main characters are both funny, and and there are several other characters that are as well, and the engagement is high. When I realized that this was a part 1 book, because none of the books previously had been broken up, so I just assumed that it wasn't. When I saw that it was part 1, I was very excited because I'm like, okay, that means part 2 probably isn't that far away. It's not like a whole nother realm book. It's just part of the same realm. My brain is thinking, and it's already out from the point that I did this recording. So I'll be listening to it shortly, and I'm very excited. And that's it. I hate to see when they change narration, but at least the book is good. I'm still going to keep listening. It's worth it to me. And so you'll be getting a review for book 2 probably soon. Let's see here. Like, subscribe, comment. There's been some interesting comments about the previous one where I graded the narrator a little bit worse than what others would have, and so there was some good discussion on that, I feel like. I recently put out a review for a nonfiction book. Please feel free to read or to watch that and give me some feedback, because I'm not so sure how to do reviews for those. I did it, and it is what it is, but I don't have a lot of feedback on that. I listen to my books on Audible. There'll be a link for that. I drink a protein shake for lunch every day because that's easy. There'll be a link for that. There's a link for my Patreon, which gets you nothing but supports me. And that's it. See you guys next week. Bye.